This Saturday, we will find out who the NFL Walter Payton Man of the Year is. I've cast my vote so far for Greg Olsen, number 88, for the Carolina Panthers, because I believe that Greg Olsen has taken a situation in his life where there were a bunch of lemons thrown at him, and he has turned it into lemonade. So what happened was, about in 2012, Greg Olsen found out that he was having twins. A few months into the pregnancy, they went to do some tests, ultrasound, and they found out that one of the twins had hypoplastic left heart syndrome, which is a rare congenitive heart defect where the baby is born, the left side of the heart doesn't properly form. So the doctors told Greg Olsen that through a series of open heart surgeries that they would be able to restore the heart to its proper working condition, but it was going to be a long, long journey. So sure enough, the baby, TJ, was born right away, within a couple days after birth. The doctors do the first open heart surgery, it's successful, and then within 6 months of TJ's life, the doctors perform a second open heart surgery, trying to repair that left side of the heart to get it working right, and they were actually able to do that with the idea that there would be a third surgery that would have to happen within about 3 years of TJ's life. So Greg Olsen, as you can imagine, is pretty busy, particularly in the fall when football season is going on, and he didn't have a lot of time to devote to being there, and he wanted to make sure TJ had the proper care necessary, especially in between these two surgeries, so that he could be cared for and well taken care of. And so they were able, obviously as one of the best tight ends in the NFL, he's well compensated. So they had the financial means in order to pay for this. But Greg Olsen got to thinking, I'm a rich man. I've gone through some tragedy, some turmoil in my life, having to go through this with my son. What if I could extrapolate this and offer this gift to others? So Greg Olsen founded a charity, the Hardest Yard, where he is now able to help other babies who have congenitive heart defects, especially those with hypoplastic left heart syndrome. They're able to provide the level of care that Greg was able to provide for his son when he was born. It's a good example of taking what life throws at you, the messes of life, and turning it into something good. It's a good example of how God can use something that was bad and turn it into something that is used for good. It's perfect that we're studying Joseph today in the story as we move into chapter 3 of the story, because this is essentially what happens in Joseph's life. We see something bad happening to Joseph, but we see God working something good out of it. So I'm excited today to be able to talk about an issue that we call God's providence. And when we say providence, what we're talking about is we're really asking the question, how is God at work in the world? In what ways is God actively working in this world? So it's a fun question for us to wrestle with. It's fun to see how that works. And I hope by the end of today, we'll be able to see that God is in control. God is not controlling. God is in control. God is not controlling. So I want to start with the end, where we're going to end up, because this verse is so powerful. Sometimes, if you have the end in mind, then you'll be able to get to where you want to go. So today we're going to do that. This is at the end of the Joseph story. This is how God providentially has led Joseph to this point. And then we're going to unpack how we got to this point. But we're going to start with the end in mind here in Genesis chapter 50. And Gina's going to read that for us this morning.
You planned something bad for me, but God produced something good from it in order to save the lives of many people, just as He's doing today.
You produced something bad happened, you're in a mess. Life is not happening like you thought it would. You're in a really big pickle. You've messed up pretty bad, and it seems like there's nowhere to turn. But God can turn that into something good, because God is in control. God is not controlling. When we see Joseph's story, it's helpful to... actually, one of the reasons I love doing the story this way, going through the Bible chronologically, is because we can begin to see how all these pieces start to come together. We can see how people are related to one another. And as we talk about this upper story, how God's at work in our world, as we talk about God's unfolding drama, this upper story, as we move through this, we can see how these themes relate to one another, how God has worked in our past, and God will continue to work in the future. And one of those ways is that we can see just how these lessons that the characters from the Old Testament keep showing up over and over again. How God can use these misfits, how God can use the bad situations and turn those into something good. How God can take our mess and transform it and use it for God's glory. Joseph is a great example of that. Joseph, as Elise mentioned, we find out is the 12th son of Jacob. Jacob is Israel, the father of Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel is Jacob. And so we can trace it back. Kyle, how many generations did you say last week from Noah to Abraham? Was it like 7? 10? So you got 10 generations going from Noah up to Abraham. Abraham has a son, Isaac. Isaac has a son, Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons, and the youngest of which is Joseph. And as Elise was telling the story, right, we see that Jacob gives Joseph this Technicolor dream coat, and Joseph does what all the youngest siblings do. He starts to be really annoying. Any of the older siblings in here today? Can I get an amen from y'all? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? The youngest, he does. He parades it around and he says, look at this cool coat that Dad made for me. Isn't it the nicest coat you've ever seen? And they're like, yeah, of course. Why did he give it to you? You're the youngest. This doesn't make any sense at all. And to make matters worse, Joseph has these dreams. And he doesn't keep the dreams to himself. He goes back to his brothers and he says, one day I'm gonna rule over you and you're gonna bow down before me. Right? Keep that stuff to yourself. It may be a prophecy that God has given you, but don't go and say that to somebody, especially your older brothers, because they're gonna get mad at you. And that's exactly what happens with Joseph's older brothers. They get really, really mad at him. Mad enough that they want to kill him. And so they try to. They have this scheme where they're going to kill him. And there's a voice of reason in the crowd amongst the 12 brothers. It's Reuben. Reuben speaks up and says, whoa, we can't kill this guy. We're going to get in big trouble if we do that. But what we can do is we can hurt him real bad, and then we can throw him into the well, and then we can sell him to the slave traders and pretend like he's dead, and then we won't have to worry about Joseph anymore parading around as our younger brother in his fancy Technicolor dream coat. He'll be off out of the picture. And that's exactly what they do. They beat him up, they throw him into the well, wait for the slave traders to come pick him up and take him to Egypt. Now, I like to pause at this point in the story and just imagine what Joseph was going through there in the pit, in the well. It's pretty easy for us to do that, I think, because we've been there, right? We've all had lemons thrown at us. We've all messed up. And again, keep in mind, Joseph is there in part because of some dumb stuff that he did. Right? He was mean to his brothers and rubbed it in. And so they got mad at him and put him there. But also, his brothers were also responsible for this through no fault of Joseph's own. Nobody deserves to be beaten up and thrown into the pit, waiting to be sold into slavery. So we've been there. We've done some stuff that we shouldn't have. We've messed up and we find ourselves in the well. Or we've had life happen to us where it just seems like we were on the right track and all of a sudden we find ourselves in the pit, in the well. So this whole issue of God's providence really comes into play at this point, especially when we're in the pit, when we're in the well, when we've had lemons thrown at us, because what we say about God when we're in these situations determines how we view God and determines how we can respond and worship God once we're out of the pit. God is in control. God is not controlling. Imagine some passerby strolling by as Joseph's there in the pit. They're looking down at him. Man, you're in a really tough spot there, Joseph. I'm really sorry for you, but that was just God's will for your life. We say that. I've probably said that. You've probably said that to somebody. You meant well. What you're meaning to say is that, well, God is bigger than we know, and we can't understand everything there is to know about God, and God has this plan for our lives, and it's, you mean well, and it's okay, I guess, if you the meaning behind it, but what we're actually saying to Joseph in the pit is that if this is God's will for your life, then guess what? God put you there. And if we're willing to say that God put Joseph into the pit, if we're willing to say that God put Joseph into the well, then what we've done is that we've made God to be some sort of bully with a magnifying glass, and we're all just a bunch of ants. That God enjoys seeing us suffer. That God is rejoicing in our pain. And I want to be really clear about this today, brothers and sisters. Really, really clear. There's no evidence in Scripture, there's no evidence in tradition that God causes suffering. There's no evidence in Scripture, there's no evidence from tradition that God causes pain. There's no evidence from Scripture and there's no evidence from tradition that God endorses evil. But, there's a great deal of evidence from Scripture and from tradition that God can use evil and transform it for good. God is in control, but God is not controlling. God can absolutely turn the evil situations. God can turn the bad situations in our life. God doesn't cause evil. God redeems evil for good. You've been in the pit. You've been in the well. And you need to know this today. That at times it feels like God can't hear you. When you're in there, it feels like God is so far away that you can't possibly even get out. You can't dig yourself out. And what you need to know today is that God has not put you there. Because God wants what's best for you. God wants you to enjoy life, and God wants you to be in a place of worship where you can celebrate God's goodness in all things. So God didn't put you there. God did not cause it, but God can absolutely redeem your situation for good. I think it's helpful for me when I'm thinking of God's will and the trajectory that God has us on. As we're thinking about God's providence, how is God at work in our world? A helpful analogy is that of a river. This past summer, we had the first annual Ducky Regatta here at FaithBridge. It was a fundraiser for Casting Bread, and it was a ton of fun. And we had heats of 50 ducks each that would float down the river, starting here behind our office and making their way all the way to the bridge. And my role in the Ducky Derby was to be at the finish line. I had a twofold purpose here in the regatta. I would try and catch the ducks with a net before they got away from me. But I would also, at the same time, being at the finish line, I would try to remember, because the ducks had numbers on them, I would try to remember which duck had won, which duck got second place, and which duck had third place, because then those ducks would go on to the next team. You know how that works. So here I am at the finish line. Sometimes it was pretty easy. Right? One duck would come trickling down the river, and it would be the winner, and I'd say, oh, well, number 17 is the winner for this. But other times, there would be like 17 ducks coming down right at me, and I'm trying to fish them out and see, I don't know which one of these won. I hope I'm getting this right as I'm fishing these ducks out of the river, because that's the way that life works. We're in this river of life. And sometimes we're flowing down the river, and we hit a rock, and we get stuck. Sometimes we're in this river of life, and we're coming around the corner too fast, and we end up in the bank, and we're stuck there for a little while. And then other times, we just seem to navigate through there without ever hitting a rock or ever hitting the bank, and we make it to the finish line. This is exactly how God's will for our lives works, right? God's not controlling us hitting the rocks. God's not controlling us running into the bank. God very much wants us to get to the finish line, and we're going to get there. We are. We're going to get there. It might take us a little bit longer. We might be winning the race, and all of a sudden we get hung up, but we're going to get to the finish line, because God very much wants us to enjoy the blessings of eternal life with God. That's the promise. We're going to get to the finish line, but there's going to be some rocks in the way, and there's going to be some leaves in the way for how we get there. So we can see, for me, that's a helpful analogy for understanding just how God's will works for our lives. And it works this way for Joseph. He's in the pit. He gets sold into slavery, and he goes to Egypt. And Joseph, in God's providence, God is continuing. Joseph is continuing to be obedient to figure out where God would have him go next. So Joseph in Egypt, he's making the best out of the situation. He's taking life's lemons, he's turning those into lemonade. He's in the river of life. He's hit some rocks, but he's going to keep on going. And so, sure enough, he gets to Egypt and he makes his way up. He becomes second in command. And all of a sudden, through some circumstances, he gets accused of something that he didn't do. And he finds himself back in jail. Right? Does this sound like your life? It kind of sounds like my life. We go from the pit to the palace, and then we're back into the prison, and all of a sudden we're like, wait, what just happened? I thought I had things figured out, but here I am again in prison. But we're on this river of life. We're seeking God in the midst of it, and there's going to be peaks, and there's going to be valleys, and there's going to be rocks, and there's going to be times where we're flowing, and it seems like everything is working for us, and then all of a sudden we hit a rock, and what is happening? What's going on? And we start to question God, question everything, but in the midst of it, Joseph doesn't question. He's obedient. He knows that God is working all things to his good. Even if his circumstances are bad at the time, even if it doesn't feel good at the time, he's acknowledging that God is working all things to the good. So, once again, Joseph has this gift of interpreting dreams. The dreams that he should have kept to himself all those years ago with his brothers. He has this gift. God has given him the ability to interpret dreams. And so while he's in prison, they start to know, the leaders start to realize that Joseph has this capability, this gift of interpreting dreams. And so, once again, Joseph comes up, he starts working his way back up the leadership pyramid there in Egypt and working his way, talking to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, well, I had this weird dream about skinny cows gobbling up fat cows, and what does that mean? And Joseph said, I'll tell you exactly what that means. It means there's a famine coming and you better get ready. And Pharaoh says, well, should I trust you? And Joseph said, well, that's the interpretation of the dream that I have. You can trust me or not. Pharaoh trusts Joseph, and sure enough, the famine comes. And then lo and behold, they've stored up enough food because Pharaoh took Joseph's advice. And lo and behold, Joseph's brothers come looking for food. They don't know that it's Joseph. They don't know that he's second in command to Pharaoh. He's speaking Egyptian. He's speaking a different language than they speak. They don't even recognize him. He's probably shaved his head. They haven't seen him in years, and they come and they're actually asking him for food. They don't realize it's him. And Joseph is so overcome with emotion when he sees his brothers after all these years that he has to take a time out in the story to go and cry and weep for his brothers. And he has a choice in the midst of this. He can choose to be vengeful. He can choose to be spiteful. And let's be honest, that would be the easier route to take. Because sometimes it's easier to be vengeful and spiteful, especially if somebody beats you up and throws you in the pit, and they're your brothers, and you want to get back at them all these years later. Right? That would be the easy way to take. But Joseph takes the hard road of forgiveness. Joseph takes the hard road of doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. And he's able to do this because he understands that God is in control. God is not controlling. So he offers forgiveness to his brothers and tells them who he is. And then he offers these words that Gina read for us. And let's all read them together. You planned something bad for me, but God produced something good from it in order to save the lives of many people, just as he's doing today. In your situation, it seems bad. It seems like there's no way out. It seems like you're never going to recover from it. It seems like there's no hope left at all. And brothers and sisters, you need to be reminded today, there might have been something bad planned, but God can absolutely use it for good. God does not cause evil, but God can absolutely redeem your situation and turn it into something good. The New Testament writers had to wrestle with this. They tried to make sense of God's providence, especially in light of the Jesus event. They had to make sense of, well, how does God providentially work in the world now that we know what God's love in the flesh looks like? And so the Apostle Paul is thinking through this, and he brings to mind the cross of Christ. And he said, if God can redeem something so evil as a weapon of capital punishment, if God can redeem death, if God can even take death and turn it into resurrection, then God can absolutely turn our situation into something good. Here's what he says as he's writing to the Romans. We know that God works some things, all things. God is working all things together for good, for the ones who love God and who are called according to His purpose. So about this time last year, I found out that my nephew, who was due to be born in May, was diagnosed with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, which was a terrible news for our family, terrible time of weeping and trying to figure out what this all meant. We were asking the same questions that everybody asked in the pit. How can a good God who's loving allow this to happen to our family? And we heard in those moments that God can work all things to the good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. We remember Genesis 50, that God can use things that are bad in this life and turn it into something good. And so in May, Wyatt was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome. And just like Greg Olson's son, a few days after he was born, he has to have his first surgery. And then, about 5 months after that, he had surgery. And in those in-between months, the Hardest Yard Foundation, Greg Olson's foundation, helped my sister and brother-in-law with some of their medical expenses so that they could care for Wyatt. God was orchestrating a bad situation and turning it into something good. And over Christmas this year, I got to hold Wyatt and play with him and talk about a blessing, right? You would never know that chunky monkey that I'm holding right there had anything wrong with his heart. And I want to tell you today, brothers and sisters, that no matter how deep your pit is, no matter how far you think you've fallen, we serve a God who takes the broken pieces of our lives and turns it into something that's put together. We serve a God that takes the mess of our lives and turns it into something good. We serve a God who takes something as terrible as death and turns it into resurrection. So you better believe that God can fix the mess that you're in. Let us pray. God, we are thankful that you are working in our world. We're thankful that you have put us in this river. We're even thankful that when we're in this river, there's bumps and corners and sticks and rocks. Sometimes it feels like there's no way out. There's no hope, but you have offered us hope. So we praise you today for that hope, that promise that not even death has the final answer. We want to go across that finish line and celebrate eternally with you. So God, show us just how much you love us. Show us indeed that you are the God who takes the ashes, who takes the dry bones, who takes even death and turns it into something good. Allow us to see how you're at work in our world. Allow us to see how you're at work in each of our lives so that we may know today that no matter how big our pit is, that you love us and you want what's good for our lives. That no matter what we're going through, no matter our circumstance or situation, that we can shout, "It is well with my soul." And that we can shout it and proclaim it because we trust in your goodness and we trust that you are indeed working all things for good. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we pray.